Hey everyone, welcome back to Otome.com podcast, where we dive deep into the stories behind your favorite games. I'm Lovers Liz.
And I'm Morik. They were talking about where Otome games come from and how they've evolved over time.
Yeah, and to understand Otome games, you've got to go back to their roots in visual novels. As you know, visual novels are story driven, text heavy games with player choices shaping the narrative, and this format became popular with Japanese players during the 1980s. The word otome translates to maiden, which means that those types of visual novels were made specifically for female players. The real breakthrough for Otome games came in the mid 90s with the release of Angelique.
So, Angelique, released in 1994 by Koei, is often credited as the first true Otome game, and it was a pretty big deal. The game was developed by a mostly female team called Ruby Party, which was a huge shift at the time because gaming was still very male dominated, both in terms of developers and players. Angelique was designed specifically for women, and it's where a lot of core elements of Otome games come from.
What made Angelique so unique was that it combined romance with kind of strategy and world building gameplay. You played as a young woman named Angelique who was chosen to compete for the title of Queen of the Cosmos. Along the way, you managed your kingdom, but more importantly, you had to develop relationships with the Guardians, who were these powerful and handsome guys who helped you with your tasks.
So the story follows two girls, Angelique and Rosalia, who are in this isekai world. The whole idea is that they're being trained eventually to replace the queen because her powers are waning. What's cool is that the game features fully animated endings. And get this, the game even has a continuation released the following year, I believe. It extends the story along with a bunch of other extras.
Before Angelique, there weren't many games that catered to female audience, especially ones that let you build meaningful relationships with characters. Most romance in games at the time was aimed at male players, so this flipped the script completely. Plus, the game wasn't just about getting the guy, it had layers of political intrigue and management mechanics, which made it stand out even more.
And it wasn't just gameplay that made Angelique special, it was also the way the story was told. It followed the visual novel style, with heavy emphasis on reading dialogue and making choices. This gave players a sense of agency in both their romantic and strategic decisions, which was pretty groundbreaking for the time.
And here's some interesting facts. Angelique was so successful that it kicked off an entire neo-romance series by Koei, which became a huge franchise. They even made anime adaptations, manga, drama series, and more based on Angelique universe stuff. It proved that there was a strong market for these kind of games and that really opened the door for other Otome titles to be developed.
Exactly. After Angelique, more Otome games were being released, and developers started experimenting with different settings and genres. Everything from historical romance to fantasy. But Angelique laid the foundations with a mix of romance, strategy, and the idea of having a female protagonist at the center of it all.
And from there, the genre kept growing and growing, with the early 2000s giving us games like Tokimeki Memorial, which brought that high school romance vibe into play. But it's Angelique that really set everything in motion.
Yep. Without Angelique, Otome games might not have taken off the same way. It wasn't just the first, it was proof that games could focus on female-driven narratives and still be commercially successful.
So Angelique wasn't just a game, it was the birth of the whole new genre. And from its humble beginnings in 1994, Otome games have evolved to become a major part of gaming culture both in Japan and worldwide.
And with platforms like Steam and more games getting official English localizations, Otome games have found an international audience. It's a genre that's only getting more popular and diverse, thanks to the foundations of Angelique set in the 90s.
And here's what's interesting. It set the stage for many of the core mechanics we still see in Otome games today, like the branching storylines, with the choices that determine which relationships you build and what endings you get. Even though the game was released 30 years ago, That system of having multiple romantic routes and endings based on your decision is still at the heart of modern Otome games.
You can actually draw a direct line from Angelique to today's games like Mystic Messenger or Obey Me. Both of those games have that same core experience, making choices and conversations that influence the relationships you form with various characters. In Mystic Messenger, for example, you interact with different characters through a chat room, and depending on your responses, you get specific romantic routes.
And the appeal is the same. It's all about player agency and character driven storytelling. But where Angelique was more of a fantasy romance combined with a strategic world building, modern Otome games have expanded into all sorts of genres. Like the Color X Malice, for example. It's not just a romance, it's a crime thriller where you're solving a mystery while balancing romantic relationships.
Right, and that's one of the biggest shifts. While Angelique was fairly straightforward in its focus on romance and strategy, today's Otome games incorporate a wide variety of themes. You've got games like Amnesia Memories, which has psychological elements, or Eichmann Vampire, where you're dealing with supernatural characters. The complexity has really ramped up, but at their core, they're still following that blueprint Angelique laid out: romantic choices and multiple endings.
And let's not forget how accessible these games have become. Back in the 90s, Angelique was only available on consoles like Super Famicom. But now Otome games are everywhere. On your console, PC, mobile, or even on platforms like Steam. I think mobile games like Obey Me and Loft 365 have done for today's generation what Angelique did back then, making Otome games more accessible and bringing more players into the world.
Mobile platforms especially have really pushed Otome games into the mainstream. Just like Angelique made waves by being the first of its kind, today's mobile games are bringing these interactive romances to a new audience. And the episodic bite-sized format that many mobile Otome games use now is kind of a modern evolution of what Angelique did, except now you can play these games anytime, anywhere, with new content being released regularly.
It's just wild how much it's grown. What started with Angelique as this niche genre in the 90s has now turned into a massive multimedia franchises with global fan bases. And that's a testament to how powerful and immersive these stories are.
It's like Angelique was the blueprint, and today's games are just expanding on the foundation in a new and creative way. Whether it's fantasy, crime, or even historical settings, Otome games have taken the original formula and built entire worlds around it.
So, if you've ever played the modern Otome game and loved the branching stories and romantic routes, you've got Angelique to thank for paving the way.
Thanks for tuning in today's episode of Otome.com podcast. And if you're enjoying this dive into the history of Otome games, be sure to subscribe and follow us for more deep dives into visual novel gaming.
See you next time!